Kia ora, hello, I'm Philip Duncan. Thanks for joining me for our Monday weather update, recorded on the 15th of September. We've got windy weather back again this week. More damaging winds blowing through from the westerly side as we see more spring weather carrying on. Let's have a look at the satellite map. Most of the low pressure south of New Zealand, most of the high pressure north of the country, and we're in the middle with the windy westerlies off and on over the coming days, and most of the energy at the moment is south of Australia, but that is heading towards us. This current setup means there's clouds and showers on the western side of the country and the top of New Zealand, sunniest weather along the east coast. So on the air pressure map, it's a little clearer to see, and it's quite a uniform setup. And by that I mean high pressure to the north of the country, low pressure to the south, and in between those windy spring westerlies, which are surging off and on right through this week and the upcoming weekend. And there could be more damaging wind gusts as well as we go into some of this peak spring weather. But temperatures aren't too bad with the westerlies blowing through. We're not seeing as much cold air flows around the country. There is still some polar air in the mix though. It is not warming up perfectly just yet. But this current setup going into Tuesday with the high just north of the country, pulling down the northwest wind out of Australia, and so that is helping to push the polar line south of most of the country. Chatham Islands still got it with the sou'westers. A few showers on the west coast for Tuesday, maybe one or two isolated ones lingering around the North Island's western side. Otherwise, most places are fairly dry, but it is still a bit windy with those westerly quarter winds, because in some places they're northwest, others more southwest. So let's start with the gusty stuff as we go through into 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. This appears to be the next surge of windy weather. So around Canterbury in particular, through the mountains and the foothills and going inland through the main divide, you are seeing some strong gusts, well over 110, 130 kilometres an hour potentially. Obviously more in the mountainous exposed areas, but those that hug the mountains and the foothills will feel that, as will areas like Wellington, Wider Upper, even up to parts of Manawatu and Hawke's Bay, leaning onto the eastern side as those strong nor'westers come on in. Here is the noon Wednesday map. This shows 24 hours of rainfall because we do have heavy rain arriving on the west coast. There could be 60 millimetres or more. That's not too problematic for that part of the country, but shows you that this rain is sliding in. There'll be some thunderstorms in there as well. And of course, the windy weather we talked about being squeezed over the top half of the South Island and the lower third of the North Island. Showers around the western side of the North Island, there won't be very much. And for those farmers and growers out there wanting some warmer weather, those northwesterly winds should be a little kinder to you than the airflows that we've seen over the weekend with the polar line south of most of New Zealand, maybe just brushing Stewart Island. More windy weather as we carry on through Wednesday. This is coming in towards midnight, and of course this could all move around a few hours, but generally you see the nor'westers roaring through Cook Strait, brushing the Marlborough Sounds, Wellington, Wider Upper, Hawke's Bay, and obviously the worst of those winds on the eastern side of the mountains. They pick up when they come down that eastern side and as it gets squeezed through Cook Strait. So there could be damaging winds in the areas in purple, but once more, those are the more exposed areas. Some of the islands around Cook Strait and the tops of the ranges in the lower North Island. And then we jump through to noon Thursday and that wind is sort of moving further up the North Island. Once more, eastern areas, East Cape, Tairāwhiti into Hawke's Bay, those getting some strong winds. Also parts of Hawke's Bay, Manawatu, Wider Upper, along the eastern side as those strong west to northwest winds continue. Not as bad in the South Island, but there could still be some strong gusts into the northeast. As we go to noon Thursday, again, we show 24 hours of rainfall up to noon Thursday. So from noon Wednesday to noon Thursday. And the cold front comes back in here. So heavy rain on the west coast, the purple showing 100 millimetres there over in the central part. That might even go a bit higher with thunderstorms. And some of that will turn to snow as the colder airflow comes back in with polar air right up the west coast, Southland, Otago, South Canterbury, all feeling it. And other parts of Canterbury as we go through Thursday. Warmer in the North Island with west to northwest winds, very gusty in exposed places, and rain or showers over on the western side, but the top of the North Island and the eastern side look to be the driest. And by lunchtime Friday, colder air moves up into the North Island now, so you'll feel that polar southerly change coming through. It'll be cooler at the top of the country, not necessarily cold, and high pressure nearby means that the skies should be fairly dry. Wouldn't rule out an isolated shower, but generally speaking, dry weather returns back in as we start the weekend. I need to emphasize that part because being spring, it's going to change a wee bit. And you have to look over towards Australia to see why. Big cold change coming through for them going into the weekend. In fact, severe weather risks as gale force winds and another cold front come through to Australia's southeast. On Saturday, there is the cold front out on the Tasman Sea. Polar air behind it, so there'll be some thunderstorms in here as we transition from the warm north-northwesterlies to the colder west to southwesterlies. But over on the New Zealand area, it is windy weather once more. That is the main feature. And high pressure, quite powerful at 1028 hectopascals. And what that does is it kind of pushes back against that front. And so the front will fall apart as it moves closer and closer to the country, especially the North Island where the air pressure is highest. And that means the winds get the squeeze. So we'll start to feel some windy weather again going into the weekend, strong gusts, gale force winds here and there, and we might even be seeing some gale force conditions returning up to severe gale. Noon Sunday, this again shows 24 hours of rainfall from noon Saturday to noon Sunday. Heavy west coast rain, 60 to 80 millimetres over there. So you can see over the coming week, that's quite a bit of rain falling for the west coast. You guys can cope with it. The West Coast is built for weather like this, but there may be some severe weather warnings around because we're getting into that potential with rainfall and maybe snow as well, although the cold bursts are shorter lived over the next 7 days. They don't linger as long as they've done in previous weeks, and it's not overly cold for the North Island on Sunday. Northerly winds, subtropical for some of you, northwesterlies, so it's not going to be overly cold, but that colder airflow is just starting to arrive in the lower part of the South Island. So windy weather comes in on Sunday night. This is midnight Sunday. This could still change. I mean, it's nearly a week away, but you get the idea. Again, more blustery winds with some parts of the South Island alpine areas seeing gusts over 130, 140 kilometres an hour, if this proves to be accurate this far out. And you can sort of see the bursts of wind hitting the tops of the ranges in other parts of New Zealand. So blustery weather really is off and on for the next week ahead. So with all the westerly driven airflow, the west coast gets all the rain, where you're talking well over 200 millimetres in some areas, 200 to 300 potentially for the mountainous parts of the west coast from central areas right down to southwestland. Maybe not quite as much falling in Fiordland. Eastern areas and the purple and pink shading, not seeing much in the way of rain at all this week. And western parts of the North Island, you've got some potential around Mount Taranaki in the lower portion of the western North Island, where you've got to be between 20 and 40 millimetres. You might get a thunderstorm that lifts that up a little bit further. So we really are in traditional spring weather this week. Lots of westerly gales, maybe damaging at times with power cuts, trees down, branches down, that sort of stuff. And then sort of calmer lulls in between and a lot of west coast rain. That is all from me for today.